And you told me to speak slowly, but then we lost all this time. So I'm so sorry. I'm going to do my best to slow down. All right. Yeah, I'm going to come back here. That way I'm not looking back. All right. So we're on the right slide, right? Okay. So sorry. We're doing our best here. It'll be okay. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about the history of the MDS. So back in the Wild Wild West, when we first started doing digital delivery projects, it really was like the Wild Wild West because everybody was doing it different. Each team was determining how they wanted to develop their model, what standards they were using, what level of development each of their elements were, and some of the feedback we got from some of those early pilot projects were that our contractors just didn't see a consistent deliverable. They were seeing different file names, they were seeing different level of development, all of the elements had different types of information attached to them, and so a lot of the feedback we got were, hey, every single time we get a new pilot project for digital delivery, we're having to go through and really try to figure out what has been delivered to us and what information we can use and what information we cannot. And so that conversation spurred UDOT to look at whether or not we needed more standardization and really spurred the model development standards. Oh, look at this. We have a lot of visualization, yeah, and a video. Yeah, that would have been really hard. Yeah, no. Thank you very much. Okay. Keep going. Here we go. All right, so like I was saying, we had the need to really just define a consistent deliverable, and so thus the model development standards were born. I think it's important to note that there was some standards that were created in the industry. They were more based on vertical, though, and so when you think about vertical versus horizontal worlds, they're just different. Vertical is, it can be contained within a fairly small site, and horizontal can go for miles and miles. And so when you think about the model elements that you're developing, you have to look at it in a completely different way than what the horizontal world had done. And so we needed to focus on the horizontal industry and really what was unique and what was needed for the model development standards for that. So here's a little bit of a timeline. The first draft was started back in 2020. That was a good year, right? No, it wasn't. Anyways, it was started back in 2020, and UDOT formed a group of consultant design engineers together. They utilized the aid grant and really dug into what everybody thought the model development standards should be. We published our first draft in 2020, and that's been on the UDOT Digital Delivery website since then. And then what we did was we took that draft and we actually applied it to pilot projects. And so Ali and I worked on, I believe, the very first pilot project who piloted the MDS, and then there's been a handful since that have also piloted it. And so what we did was we went through, we utilized the first draft on our pilot, and there was a few things that didn't quite fit, and so we provided that feedback back to UDOT and said, hey, we need a little more guidance here, or we need this to be a little bit different. And so from that kind of spurred just making a few revisions to make it a little bit more applicable to actual projects. Miss Ariel.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Thanks. Yeah, good for the front row. Okay, thanks, Nicole. So next I'm going to get a little bit more into the details of the actual document. LOD, a lot of people are probably familiar with this, but just in case you're not, this is a definition we're using. It's basically a qualitative designation to communicate the engineering intent behind a model element. So basically tell someone what that model element could be used for, how much effort the designer put into it. So I'll walk through the LOD definitions that UDOT has come up with that we're currently using. They are 1 to 400. Like Nicole mentioned, this doesn't match all other industry standards. When they were going through the process of developing these, they really wanted something that would work for Utah, for people who are out actually doing the design and the construction, who maybe aren't as involved in the world of BIM. They're maybe not, here today, so they needed something a little bit simpler. This chart communicates pretty well the differences between them, so I'm just going to kind of zoom in and go through each of these. So LOD 100 is our lowest LOD. This is basically anything schematic. It might not be tied to the coordinates system. The example we have here is some ATMS. So it's just kind of line work. You can see where things, kind of how they correspond to each other, but you can't really get accurate quantities. You can't really use this to actually build anything, but it does give you a little bit of information. LOD 200 is a step up from that basically. This example is striping, so it's something that has the location correct. You can get quantities from it. It's tied to the project coordinate system. It's got some data attributes, but there's still probably no 3D information, and you're going to need some other outside sources to actually construct this. So for striping here, we don't have any elevations. It's just the 2D, and then you'll need additional information on, if you're laying out these stripes. Another example of like 200 for us usually is our ped ramps. We're kind of doing some piloting now to see what level of development we should be putting into ped ramps, but a lot of the time we just kind of put a little symbol and say ped ramp goes here, it's got the location, it's one ped ramp, but we don't really give them anything else. So LOD 300 is where we start to get into having some 2D and some 3D information. Right now probably 200 and 300 is where most of our kind of UDOT elements are, I guess, sitting at, what we've built out so far. 300 still requires some additional notes and dimensions, standard drawings. Not everything that you need can be found in the model. So the example we have here is concrete pavement, PCCP. This is a 2D representation, and I'll just kind of toggle back and forth here. And then this is the 3D. So basically in 2D, we're defining the limits of that item of the concrete pavement. We also have data attributes attached that list out the, like the spec number, different information that UDOT's included in the design. And then in 3D, we have the 3D break lines, so basically every point on that concrete surface that you would need to build it is included in the model. The reason that this isn't a 400 isn't something you can completely build from the model is we don't have any reinforcement, any rebar included, and we also don't have any of the concrete joints. So that still comes from either a detail or a standard drawing, so that's why this one's 300. The last of our definitions is 400. And this is basically something where all you need to build it is the model information and then plus the specs. The specs are always kind of out there defining a lot of things that just aren't in the model. But from the model, you can get where the element goes and all the information you need to build it. So this example is also pavement, but this is HMA or asphalt pavement. In 2D, we have a similar kind of setup to the concrete pavement. We define the limits, we attach data attributes, and then in 3D, we also have those break lines that have every surface break of the HMA pavement. Since there's not really any reinforcement or anything else you need, you can pretty much look at the model, look at the spec, and that's all you need for the asphalt. So that's why that one's 400. 400 also accounts for any incidental items. So if you have curb and gutter and you're not accounting for like the UTVC or something underneath it, that's not going to be a 400. Okay, so in the manual, we have those definitions laid out. Since on a road, there's usually just not that much stuff. There's kind of a finite amount of items you can have on a road. Usually you have pavement, sidewalk, striping, signs. Even if you have bike lanes or bike paths, it's usually mostly the same stuff. So UDOT went through and laid out what the LOD is for all of those common items. And I do want to clarify that's mostly for roadway and drainage. I know there's structures people in here. There's some structures information in this document, but I know they're working on that kind of ongoing since structures is, I don't know, it sounds a lot more complicated. But I don't know if it is. Is it? Okay. It looks horrible. I just look away from it. But anyway, they're working on it. They're amazing, UDOT structures. But anyway, so this document kind of runs through like the roadway, the drainage, signing, ATMS, anything that's kind of tied to the roadway, and just lays out what the LOD should be for that exact element so that designers don't have to interpret those definitions every time they're doing a project. So the example we have here is a sign. The detailed guidance says, you need this 2D sign. It has data attributes, and it says what you need in 3D as well. So I'll go through a little bit more of a detailed example on that with curb and gutter. I know this is way too small to read, but it basically lays out everything that you need for curb and gutter to meet the LOD, which for UDOT is right now 300 for curb and gutter. So I'm gonna see if I can get this. Oh, to play, which I'm not sure that we did because we did that so fast, huh? Oh, is it going? Okay. Oh, it is a video. Oh my gosh. Amazing job, you guys. It's because Allie knows what she's doing. Okay, here we go. So this is Open Roads Designer. This is the CAD software that we use most often on UDOT projects. Let's see if I can pause there. There we go. So I kind of zoomed out again, but basically I'm just walking through what the curb and gutter actually looks like in the design files for that LOD 300. So in 2D, the guidance says we have a line for the back of curb and we have a line for the lip of gutter where it touches the pavement, and then there's data attributes that go on that line. So the designer can look at the document and know that they need at least those lines in 2D to meet our standard. I'm gonna zoom out here, and I'm just pulling up the data attributes. This has probably come up in a ton of presentations, but they're item types. If you're familiar with Open Roads Designer, it's basically extra attributes you can attach to your elements. So we have a set of defined ones that kind of give some information on the curb and on bid items. So that's everything that has to go in the 2D portion of the curb and gutter to meet our standard. And then now I'm going to switch over and look into the 3D. Let's see if I can pause again here. Okay. So you can kind of see there's like a little bit of a gap there. It's a little bit tricky to see, but there is kind of the curb and gutter breaks a little bit. It's not perfectly modeled. We're saying for that 300, you just need the 3D components to estimate quantities and determine feasibility. So right now we're not saying that you have to perfectly model every, driveway break, every head ramp, everywhere the curb changes. You just need it to get quantities. I'm gonna zoom in here. Okay, there it goes. So that's a 3D mesh that it's highlighting, and we have a standard for like what that level and everything should look like. And then the very final piece of this LOD 300 are those break lines. If you've been in CAD a lot, this might seem okay. If not, it probably is gonna look crazy, but there's basically a bunch of lines in 3D that just represent every piece of that curb and gutter, like the top, everywhere it breaks basically. And then with those 3D break lines, that's everything that the designer would need to include in their files to meet our LOD 300 for this curb and gutter. Since it's not, I think it showed there briefly again, but there's a little bit of a break there. So again, it's not quite that 400. They're still gonna need details to know what to do when they actually get to that driveway. And then the last thing I'll touch on is how designers are actually kind of tracking this on our pilot projects. For the most part, they're using a big spreadsheet that lists our standards. So there's a column that says, basically, like, here's roadway excavation, our standard is 300, and then they just list if they're deviating. So if for some reason their project's really simple, they're just doing 200, they list that, they can add notes, they can say why. Or if they are doing, like, piloting something maybe, and they're going a little bit higher, they can also document that in this spreadsheet. And I do also just want to mention that just because something is a lower LOD, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's worse. Like for striping, we probably don't need an LOD 400 most of the time, except maybe visualization or something, but just because something's lower doesn't mean that it's bad. We're not necessarily trying to get everything up to an LOD 400. And I think with that, is my, no, 300 is my favorite because I don't have the time to go to 400.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, and having a great conversation last night about LOD, and I just want to add it here before we move on, is that this is really a communication tool for the contractor to know the level that they can build it to. And so as design teams, we use this as guidance, but those detailed modeling guidance sections that Ariel showed are really what's helpful for the designer. I've been in there and had to figure out what's wanted for driveways. And so, if your state is looking at this as kind of all that's needed, I just want to say your designers are going to be scratching their head. So that extra detail is really helpful in knowing what's expected for your deliverable. So I'm going to get into the last section of the MDS here. It's chapter 4. I love this chapter. It's model management. We worked a lot on the updates in this chapter because there was a big question of, is this the right place for it? We're giving standards. Do we need to tell people how to manage their projects? We felt very strongly that this was a critical piece for projects to actually deliver that standard process across the board and get to their They're really, again, standard deliverable. Sorry to say standard so many times. But here's the 3 main things that we looked at. So being able to assign the roles and responsibilities to the project team. We looked at making that not too cumbersome. But one of the key roles is really having that model manager, someone that can help communicate across the different disciplines. What are those requirements? What workspace are we in? And then we've got model use case. So when you start your project, being able to look and say, what model use cases are we going to apply? And I'll show you some of those here in a minute. And then also being able to say, what tools and technology are we going to need, and make sure everyone's on the same page as to what's going to be used on the project. So a little bit of details here on the roles and responsibilities. We've got a digital delivery lead, which is new. And then we've got model managers. And the idea is that a project team can break this apart as much as they need. So in our case, in our pilot project, we had 3 different organizations really leading a lot of the effort. Yeah, 4. Thank you. But we had model managers for each one. And so that was something that was really helpful because we were able to keep up with this communication, right? And so as we had issues throughout the project, we went to UDOT and said, how should we proceed with this? And sometimes they said, you know what, you guys can do what's best for the project team. And sometimes they said, no, this is how you need to do it. So being able to have that communication up with the DOT, but then also throughout the project team. The other responsibilities are troubleshooting and providing technical support. It really helps to have a streamline and single point of contact. If all of the designers are asking the same question, they don't know that someone else might have found that answer. So lots of spreadsheets and tracking on, what were the questions that we needed to answer and who needed to answer that. We actually had a tracker that, noted who do we need to contact, right? Is this a CAD issue? Is this a general project guidance that we need to do? And so that was something we did on a project level, but these responsibilities are laid out in the MDS so that when the team starts the project, they know who's the right person to fit this. Do we need someone who's a digital delivery expert? Well, we need to get there, right? We need to have somebody that does understand the requirements, but people can train in. They can step into this, right? A lot of us are going to be new, and this comes into a lot of organization, and we heard a lot of feedback that was one of the most helpful things when we piloted it. So moving on, model use case. So these are the model use cases that UDOT has identified, and you'll see them a little bit more in a minute. But basically on the right-hand side, you've got design elements. These are digital design review. Do we want to eliminate the plan sheets? How are we going to do that? What's our platform we're going to use? Model-based design quantities. So this is something that project teams don't have to do, right? But it's an added benefit of using the item types and pulling reports. There's different deliverables for UDOT. So we were able to use the open roads reports to streamline those quantities. And that report looks different for the contractor. Now it's a spreadsheet, whereas it used to be, standard, more of a standard drawing style. So that's something project teams need to think about. And, with item types being easy to add and UDOT's workspace being so easy to use, traditional projects are absolutely going to be tapping into this more. And that's one of the things you'll see in a minute is that we really looked at how are traditional projects going to use some of these cases. Clash detection, that's, your 3D looking at, the conflicts between sign bases. And, again, it's that added benefit of when we go to 3D. So asset inventory, this is, really that tracking of what are the item types required. We did decide that this was one that we wanted to require on all projects, even traditional. It's the only model use case that we did that for. And then record model, that goes into the digital as-built, only optional right now because there are still so many processes being worked on to see what that will look like. And then digital construction inspection. So if we take out the plan sheets, if we go digital design review, we have to be ready for digital construction inspection. Those are very related, and we wanted in the model development standards to help project teams know that, right? You need to be thinking about that if you take out your plan sheets. And then design deliverables for contractors. So we actually have probably 5 different deliverables in that section. This used to be automated machine guidance, but we found that, they really need to be able to locate their pay items. They need to be able to understand all the files they're getting. And so we opened it up to just say, what are all the deliverables that are needed for construction? I hope you guys are staying with me. I know it's early. Okay. So technology and tools, this is the guidance to help teams think about what is that model use case and what tools are we going to use to get there, because teams need to be on the same page. Having the same version is very important for Open Roads Designer, right? Some of you all know the pain, you're shaking your heads. So that was our goal here, was to give project teams the flexibility to decide how they want to communicate and organize, but let them know that it's critical when you do digital delivery to have an organizational system that the team can go back and look at. So these are 3 of the major pilot projects that use the MDS in its draft state that came out in 2020. Orderville piloted it with Autodesk software. So that was some great feedback on what areas, really were difficult. Because a lot of our workspace, right, it's Bentley, and we had to acknowledge that. And then we've got I-84 that was the first pilot with structures. And then I-15 Springville Spanish Fork. Some of you all might have seen our presentation earlier this week, but that's the one that Nicole and I, and Ariel, you basically were an honorary member of that project team. So this is going to go into some of our main updates to the MDS. I would say this was one of our biggest goals. How can we make sure that the model development standards can be used on traditional projects? We want this to be a standard for all projects. We want modeling to be uniform, and we had a lot of support from the DOT saying, we have standards, we have CAD standards, now we want people to model similarly. It's not saying that you don't have the freedom in your templates, but you know what, we have a standard template for a reason, and we want to do the same with ourselves and that thought process. So we looked at it as what needs to be traditional, what can we expand to hybrid projects, and then of course that fully built out digital delivery project. We also, with digital delivery in the document, you'll now see it referred to as MALD. Model is the legal document, as a lot of you guys have been hearing this week. Just left it up as digital delivery for now, but that was a term that we walked away from a bit because we wanted folks to be able to have a hybrid project, to pull out some of these model use cases and not have to say, well, this isn't digital delivery, so I'm not doing that. So when we looked at the detailed modeling guidance, one of the biggest things we wanted to say is this a standard that goes on a traditional project? So Ariel and I walked through a lot, step by step, and sat through and said, do we want signs to be 3D, right? Is that level of effort necessary? We came to the agreement that it was, because clash detection is so important. So it is going to be extra work. And so, once these do become standard, that's going to be training, right, that the designers need to understand, and they need to understand the value. And so we went through all of the detailed guidance to make sure that it was clearly defined. If you don't have a model as a legal document project, you're not going to have to do break lines for this part, maybe not a break line file. And so we went through each section, and then the 2D for asset data. So that's the asset inventory. One thing that UDOT does is the item types are all put on a 2D element. This was easy translation for GIS, and as a designer, we wanted to make it sure that it was very easy to go to the model development standards and understand what your model is supposed to look like now. I mean, it should be obvious, but we've got guidance here on the website. We've got it over here in a training document, and so we wanted to pull all those things together so that me as a designer, I know, okay, the 2D is used for GIS. I need to put my asset data there. And then for fully digital, standalone breakline files. The corridor files have breaklines in them, right? When we model, we've got breaklines. The difference here is a curated breakline file that can be run through Trimble Business Center, and the contractors can rely on it. There's no issues. So we wanted to make sure folks knew that level of design that was going to be required. And then, pointing them to the digital delivery website for those details. So these are the model use cases. This is a table you'll see in the MDS. Really just noting okay, cool. So noting which model use cases are required on MALD projects. We actually thought a lot and talked a lot about the digital design review component. I don't know if you guys, what presentations you've caught this week, but there's a lot of challenges still with it. But we did feel like it's such an added benefit for digital delivery that we did put it as required. And so part of that's going to be training with teams on, UDOT being able to say, these are the softwares we've tested that we would recommend using. as a way to move away from the plan sheets. But yeah, that only model use case that's required on traditional is the asset inventory. UDOT has an amazing spreadsheet that is so easy to find and say, if I have a sign base, what are the item types I need to add? You know, if I have concrete barrier, what do I need? And so it's just really easy as a designer to understand those expectations. And then hybrid is something that I think is great because project teams get that flexibility, right? To go to their PM and say, you know what, we could have a lot of benefit from doing 3D clash detection, but we want to make sure it's in the scope of our project. So our goal was for this to also be a tool in helping with scoping and having those discussions. Yeah, and then let's see. Some of our other updates in chapter 4, when we talked about model management and the model uses, just really wanted to make it flexible for teams as they're smaller sizes, you know, and really not wanting it to be burdensome. So having a model manager is a lot more daunting than saying you need to have a robust team that's, you know, digital delivery experts, trying to bring it down so that teams can upscale and downsize it as needed. And then, yeah, moving away from the digital delivery term into model management, and then as well as some of those model use updates of connecting it to the deliverables. You know, being a designer, I know that I want to know what the deliverable is because I need to work to that. And so that was a big part that I brought into this document of saying, how can we connect them with that end goal? And some of the feedback that we got from the pilot projects was really to make it software agnostic. So we acknowledged the workspace being built out for Bentley, and you know, just made sure that the rest of the document could be used universally. And then the data attribution that we talked about, making sure that that's on 2D. The LOD spreadsheet. So we did go over the LOD recommendations as they are today, and I was double checking it, and we actually did not make changes except for to that ATMS conduit, you know, really going back to that 100. But it just needs more piloting, more testing, more people to provide feedback. And so what we did add was instructions, helping project teams understand what they're supposed to do with the LOD spreadsheet. Awesome. Now Nicole's going to talk about next steps.
Thank you so much, Allie. See, she took the hard stuff. I got the easy stuff. So, next steps. So, model development standards. We talked about how we updated the draft. Now we're going to work on finalizing this. So this is going to go through the standards committee at UDOT. And then as soon as they finalize that, then we are going to push it out as a final document. It's still listed as draft on the website right now. And so once it's a final document, we're going to start training and implementation. And so for our training, we're going to make sure that similar to what we've talked about today, similar presentation, but actually get it out there on a recording and make sure that that gets broadcasted across Utah. Really just helping teams to understand that, again, this can be used on all projects, and asset inventory has to be used on all projects, but really trying to help encourage them to use a little bit more and do more of that hybrid option, because there are so many benefits that can be found from fully developing out your projects and each of those model elements. So just wanted to kind of put a plug in for how to find this. So UDOT's digital delivery website, really easy to find. You just Google UDOT digital delivery. And this is the vanity but URL code, but you just Google it. It's actually the first thing that comes up, and then whenever you get on there, you just have to click on this roadway design card, and then this is what you'll see. So it's under the standards, and when you click on it, you will see that it is still in draft until we get that finalized through the standards committee. And so with that, I told you I had an easy part. We are open for questions. And we have time. We have time for questions. Look at that.
You had that spreadsheet where you show within the model development process, this object goes in at level 300, this one goes in at 400, this one at 200. Do you also include within that spreadsheet information like which details or other content you would point to as part of the plan delivery?
I don't think so. I think there is an option for notes. There's like a notes column that designers could add, but I don't think we are pointing to everything.
The reason I ask
Yeah.
is I think a lot of our staff we're going to be
I think as far as the training and implementation goes, I mean, we are going to have training videos that new staff can watch. And then I think the thing that UDOT does really, really well is they provide very hands-on support. And so Ariel and Bob and others in the digital delivery group are just very accessible. When we were piloting the project, we were reaching out to them fairly constantly to say, hey, this doesn't make sense to us, or hey, we don't understand this, or hey, what do we add here, or what do you think we should do for a level development for this, because we don't understand the guidance. And so I think for a little bit, while this kind of gets up and running and people get used to it, there's going to be a little bit of that back and forth. But I think once you get into it and teams start doing it, and it's just going to become what we do. Just like when we were cutting plan sheets, right? It's just what we do. So I think it's going to take a little bit of time, but I think we'll get there. Terry? Only if you're a nerd.
I don't think we do. I think so far we've left up to the contractor.
We've had one or two very small projects where we push something out, and that's one thing we found out from the contractor partners. And that could be we're so new in the process, like you said, it's not the business culture yet. So everybody's kind of asking questions because they don't know. Maybe MnDOT didn't know to put the information in, or the contractor didn't know. It was in there, just in a different format.
So I know as part of some of the very first pilot projects that were done, not the more recent ones, but we actually had a specification and a pay item that was called an MBDC coordinator, model-based design and construction coordinator, and it had some requirements as far as what that coordinator had to do, and it included training of the software that we were using at the time, which was Open Roads Navigator, and I think training on rovers and iPads and things like that. And so in a sense, that was kind of the model manager that was in design. But I think from the start of this, we've always said that the designer is going to have to be more involved in construction with this type of delivery. And that's because it is different, and it's going to take time for the contractors to get fully used to this. And so we need to be ready to answer questions and help guide them through this until it becomes the standard. Yeah. So I know on several of our pilot projects we were meeting with them weekly, and it was like a MBDC meeting specific that then would go to biweekly and then once a month as they got kind of into the swing of things and felt more and more comfortable with the project. And then sometimes we had to bump it back up to every week if we needed to, if we got into something more complicated. Oh yeah. So yes, absolutely. I do think that your designers are going to have to be more involved and maybe this week we're going to talk about the drainage items and next week it's structures, but you're going to have one of the model managers for each of the discipline and or the overall model manager helping be very plugged in throughout construction.
Get used to meetings.
So you talked about LOD 300, like at curb ramps and everything being for feasibility quantities. Are you still using traditional 2D plans or like details to show the design intent? And then also two, are you seeing the contractor on these pilot projects requesting LOD 400 to have that further defined in the design process?
I would say quite the opposite. Contractors have been putting ped ramps in for years and years and years, and they don't want us to dictate how, because they want the flexibility of meeting the standard. We at UDOT, they have very well defined PedRamp standards, and so it, as a designer, it's a little bit easier to point them back to those. But I don't know if that's something that we would consider in the future, if the tools got a little better. I think the hard part with PedRamps is you have such small tolerances, and if your survey is off by just a little bit, those tolerances are incorrect. And so there needs to be a little bit of flexibility because of those tolerances in the field.
And you said curb and gutter too, and so for the curb and gutter, even though it's just LOD 300, we still provide curated brake line files. So they still have the benefit of being able to use the brake lines. It's just during ped ramps or driveways, that's where you would lose the accuracy there. Yep.
I guess two questions. With this whole process, has there been an update to like the fee guidance for getting people to fill out this extra attribute data? And then in turn, is there anything in place to do quality control on making sure that the assets are getting filled out and not missed or forgotten?
So I'll cover the first one, then I'm going to let one of these ladies cover the second one. So depending on your type of project, right? So if you're doing a full digital delivery project, you're cutting out plan sheets, and so you're still putting the information in. You're just putting it in different. And so a lot of our teams are feeling like there's not a huge extra amount of effort that's going into that. It's just, it looks different, but there is a learning curve. And so I think when you first start getting into this, you're going to have to anticipate a little bit more on the PE side. And I don't think we have any data as far as like percentage, but I also feel like a lot of the first projects are piloting a lot of things. And so it would be really hard to get any actual data on it.
That's just the first thing I always hear from consultants.
It's more expensive.
What about the fee guidance? What about the fee guidance? You never made us fill out attributes before. This whole thing's up to you. I want paid for it.
So I think this is a good conversation, and I think it's really important to note that what we're doing with digital delivery is we're putting that back on the designers now to actually really truly design it correctly, and to a higher level, and where it should be, right? We're signing and sealing it, so we should be making sure that what we're putting out there is designed to the level and of quality that it needs to be done. And so when you think about it from that standard, or from that standpoint, yes, it's going to be a little bit more expensive for us to do that, but the return on investment is that you then have less change orders in the field because we've designed it a lot better. And so I think it's going to be a shift. You're going to put a little bit more money up front, and you're going to save money on the back end, because the pre-construction is a fraction of the construction cost. That's just my opinion.
So Riley's in the back. I'm going to call you out. But so Right Away is the only group right now that has required the asset inventory component on all projects. And they're a little ahead of the game. And what we've done is try to communicate, right, in all forms. It's been a big effort to make sure that everyone knows, PMs know, this is a new requirement for Right Away. So I guess I would just say, Riley, have you seen any of those discussions? Because I know that it's really been up to the project teams to come back, right, and say, well, hey, we're going to need additional funding. But I haven't heard any, major gripes. So.
I think it'd be great to hear from a project manager too. Yeah. We haven't actually updated it, but Dave, I mean, you're a project manager, that has done digital delivery projects. I'm going to call you out now. I mean, what are your thoughts whenever your teams come to you and say, hey, our fee needs to be a little bit higher in order to accommodate for this stuff?
We pay a lot more for it. It's on the design side. Some of it's, how do I say it delicately, tools we use. I'll leave it at that. And then some of it is just learning curve, and like, if you're the first snowplow, you're pushing all the snow, right? So sometimes we pay more upfront for it. So on my project, probably not gonna claim the savings on the construction side. Possibly, but probably not. It's hard to judge that stuff. But I think down the road, possibly.
You asked two questions.
Yeah, the second one was just, is there any like QC set in place for making sure these attributes are being filled out? Or you didn't forget the package itemized?
I think that's where the reports are really helpful. So, we didn't specify how they have to QC, but knowing that you can run a report of all attributes is a really good way to QC.
And then
Awesome.
you can like kind of compare the quantities.
Mm-hmm. Got just 5 minutes left, yeah? Yeah.
So this is a little bit off topic, but now that the model is legal document, does that go into a records repository, and what are your plans for DGN not being usable in 20 years?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be a millionaire if I knew that. But I think I'm gonna say we haven't solved that. I think we are trying to get almost all of our projects now with what Derek in the back's been working on into a GIS system, since that, for the most part, is pretty widespread across the department and accessible. I don't know if we have a plan for the DGN. Yeah, no, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
I guess that's one of the concerns we see going forward. It just Vision questing that one out was, can I say the model of legal record transforms from the CAD to a GIS system, or do I have to build a methodology? Because the other thing I envision is, well, I'm going to be pushing content to my asset system about what was dedicated on date X when the project was completed. But do I also need to put some of that data in other business systems? And do I have to define how they would be recreated or reassembled to recreate that plan? And that's kind of, when you start thinking about like an attorney, you can't do design anymore in 3D.
Yeah, I guess if you figure it out, we'll be here to find out from you.
How does some of this stuff affect like scheduling? Because you guys had to modify scheduling to accommodate some increased time that's expected from this.
So,
The level of detail kind of different milestones.
yeah. On UDOT's website, they've got another great tool that's called the Execution Plan at Milestones. I do think we reference it in the MDS. Again, just trying to point back to the website as much as possible. But it's a scheduling tool for project teams to know what deliverables are expected at each milestone. So, for instance, the item types, they're actually not required until 90%. Now, we found that likely you're going to be putting them on a little bit earlier, but the full build out wasn't until 90. And then, actually, I would say a lot of the effort got shifted a little bit later in the game because you're really curating those models at the end once all the project decisions have been finalized. So I would say schedule-wise, that was probably something we found as a project team. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, going back to what Dave was saying, there's going to be a learning curve, so it's going to take longer at first because it's a new process. But I think as teams get more and more used to it, it's going to, I think, be similar to cutting sheets, adding station offsets for every pay item, having a discipline set for every single discipline on your project, all the details associated with that, et cetera. And so I think it's just shifting from one type of delivery to another type of delivery, but it's going to take longer at first.
When you say it's a new process, part of the issue is the process is evolving and you're doing it, right?
That.
We jump into this, it's like, hey, we're doing digital deliveries. We don't know what that really, kind of know what it means, but we don't exactly, And so that's the other issue. I mean, we're continually changing things and modifying things and tools. Construction deals with it. But you have to start somewhere. You have to do something. You have to try something to make the element and try it. It doesn't mean forward. Just if you try to make it perfect all at once, you're not going to get it right.
I was just going to add that, you know, luckily we're going to have the model development standards now. It's going to be a good place that, you know, as we're adding to it, at least we're going to have this as a good baseline. So really hope to help give people a good starting place. So awesome.
And I think a lot of the other pilot projects, other than a few, they didn't have that. And so now that they actually have those standards, hopefully that kind of calms down the constant changing. So we actually have a standard now.